Words of joy and hope. The second Sunday of Advent. Year B. Gospel according to St. Mark chapter 1 verses 1 to 8. Commentary of Father Fernando Armelini. Greetings to all. Today we listen to the first passage of the Gospel according to St. Mark, the Gospel that will accompany us throughout this liturgical year. This book was written in a dramatic moment for the Christian community of Rome. Nero's persecution had recently ended, recounted by Tacitus in a memorable page of his Annals. Among the victims of this persecution had been also Peter and Paul, considered the pillars of the church, and the disappearance of these two apostles deeply shook the community of Rome and caused it to reflect, realizing that the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life would not remain with them forever, and began to raise the questions as to how the gospel message proclaimed by the apostles can remain intact even when they were no longer there. How can we avoid the danger of someone altering the message that Jesus of Nazareth left us and made additions or cuts? How do we keep this message pure? This wounded community has decided to deliver the message left to us by the apostles in a written text. For this work, Mark, an eminent figure of this community, was entrusted with this task because he had been Peter's interpreter, and then he dedicated his whole life to the gospel. Let us listen to how Mark begins his account.
The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
The beginning of the gospel is a little strange, this way of beginning to write a book. What need was there to warn his readers, I am going to begin to write the gospel? This is not the sense of the first verse of Mark's gospel. If we examine closely the terms he uses, we will immediately realize that the message he wants to communicate is not trivial. The first words he uses, beginning, in Greek, arche. It was not a randomly chosen word. Arche is the word with which the Bible begins. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Why does Mark use this word? It is precisely because he wants to refer to that beginning, back at the world's creation, to that world that lasted for a long time, so long, and in which people committed so many evils, injustice, wars, and violence. Everyone was tired of that world. They could not stand it anymore. There was a generalized expectation everywhere that at last something new would emerge. For example, in Israel, the prophets were addressing the poor of the land, to those who had returned from exile in Babylon and were exploited and humiliated. And these prophets were encouraging these poor people, promised that God would create new heavens and earth where justice would reign forever. By using the term beginning, Mark wanted to say to the Christians of his communities and to us, I am going to tell you how the new world everyone was waiting for began, and that today we see sprouting and growing in our communities. The second term, gospel, beginning of the gospel. When we speak of Gospels, we refer to the four books written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But at the time of Mark, these Gospels had not been written. And even when they were written later, they were not called Gospels. The first one who called them so was Justinian, when he wrote his first apology in the year 165. So it had been 100 years since the Gospel of Mark was written. Previously, these four books were anonymous. They had no title. So, what did Mark mean when the term gospel, beginning of the gospel? We know that evangelion is a Greek word, well known in antiquity. Homer had already used it. It simply means good news, joyful news. When people heard the news that aroused joy, they said that they had listened to a gospel, and this good tiding could be public. Thus, when they won a war and the news came that they had won, they had heard a gospel. Or it could be a news of a private character. Thus, if a person was healed, the one who received this news would say, I have received a gospel. And even more critical is the emperors use the term gospel. What did the emperors do? When they came to the power, to the throne, they presented their programs and what they promised to the people. Naturally, welfare, health, peace, justice. They called these announcements their gospels, the good news they gave. And even more important was the news related to the emperor's life. It is very famous, the inscription found in Abilene in Asia Minor. It dates from the year 9 AD. Jesus was 16 years old when it was written. What does this Abilene inscription say? It provides that the year should not begin on the 1st of January but on September 23 because Caesar Augustus was born on that day. And this is the reason he gives for this provision. It says that the day of the birth of the god Octavian Augustus was for the world the beginning of the Gospels, the beginning of all happy news. The reference was to the Pax Romana sung by Virgil. They were years of peace and prosperity throughout the Mediterranean, and many believed that the golden age had begun with Caesar Augustus. When in the year 68, Mark wrote his book, Augustus died for over 50 years, and the hopes for a new golden age were dashed. The hope that had been placed in him had disappeared. Already in the years of his successor, his adopted son Tiberius, the expectations of a world of peace and justice had completely vanished. Just think what was happening in Rome when Sejanus ruled, while Tiberius half had dementia in Capri, indulging in all debaucheries and perversions. Tacitus, in his Annals, dramatically describes the situation in Rome where, to survive, people had to juggle skillfully with daggers and poisons. Also, of the first 12 Caesars, 7 and maybe 8 died violent deaths. And just when Mark, in the year 67, began to write his work, a short but violent civil war broke out. And after 3 emperors, Vespasian came to power. In conclusion, It could not be said that the day of Augustus' birth began a new era for the world of Gospels, of the good news. So, using this term to designate the beginning of the Christian message, Mark intends to tell his readers that the Gospels and the proclamations of Augustus and other emperors were a disappointment. All the expectations and hopes placed in them have been disappointing. What then is the good news of which Mark speaks? It is not information. This good news is a person, Jesus of Nazareth, because if I listen to him, if I look at him, I see and hear good news. News that has never been announced before. God's unconditional love. No one expected this. They had always said that God would love the good and hate the bad. People had always supposed that God would reason and think as they did, judge as they did, that he would just be like them and bestow his favor and blessings on those who obeyed his commands, and would punish with disease, calamities, and plagues to those who dared to defy him by transgressing his commands. All religions have always preached this. Jesus came to tell us that all this was not true. It was all lies and about God. He brought the good news, the gospel. He told us that God envelops us in his love and fills with tenderness and blesses all, those who are good and those who are less good, and loves them freely and always. For all are his children, his sons and daughters. This good news had never been given before. No religion had ever announced this news about God. This is the gospel, the beautiful face of God that we see shining in the face of Jesus of Nazareth. When we look at him, we see the beauty of our God. And Mark gives two titles to Jesus. Let us listen.
Christ, the Son of God.
The first title Mark gives Jesus is Christ, Christos in Greek, and Messiah in Hebrew. Messiah comes from the verb Messiah, which means to anoint. Why is Jesus called Christ, the anointed one? In Israel, the kings and priests were anointed with oil. What did this rite mean? We know that the oil penetrates. If a drop of water falls on a cloth, we do not worry because then it dries and everything remains as before. But if a drop of oil falls, it penetrates. This rite indicated the communication, the penetration of a divine force in those who were called to perform a function that required higher capacities than those of ordinary mortals. The priest was to be a mediator between people and God. A power, a special spirit from heaven had to be communicated to him. The king who was to lead a people administering justice in the name of God was called to receive the Spirit of the Lord and therefore to be anointed with this Spirit that was to penetrate him. Mark tells us that Jesus is the Christ par excellence, the anointed of the Spirit of the Lord. In him, the Spirit is present in its fullness. He is filled by nature with the Spirit of the Lord, of the divine life. He came to bring into the world and to communicate not only to priests and kings, but also to give his Spirit to all. The second title Son of God
Secondo titolo. Figlio
does
di
not mean
Dio
that he was a
non
son like
intende
the
dire che era
pharaohs
figlio
who
come i
were begotten
faraoni, che
physically
erano
by the god
generati
Amun.
fisicamente dal dio
No,
Ammon. No.
in the Semitic culture,
Nella cultura
son
semitica,
rather than begotten by
figlio più che
meant similar
generato
to.
da significava
A
somigliante
father
a
recognized
un
his son
padre.
when he resembled
Riconosceva un
him,
suo figlio
not so
quando
much
questi
in
gli
outward features
assomigliava,
as when he reproduced his
quando
character,
non tanto nelle
the
fattezze
values he had
esteriori, ma
cultivated in
quando
life.
riproduceva il suo carattere, i
If,
valori
for
che lui
example,
aveva
the
coltivato
father is a
nella vita.
loyal,
Se per
honest
esempio
person,
il padre era una
attentive to
persona
others,
leale, onesta,
hardworking,
attento agli altri, laborioso, e
and
poi il
then
figlio
his
era un
son was a
lazzarone
wild
scapestrato, la
rascal,
gente
people
diceva
would say,
non è suo figlio,
that is
sì, l'ha
not his
messo al
son.
mondo lui, ma non è
He
suo
brought
figlio,
him into the
non gli
world, but he is
assomiglia.
not
Bene.
his son. He doesn't
Quando
look like
Marco
him.
chiama Gesù figlio di Dio,
When
vuol
Mark
dire che
calls Jesus
riproduce
the Son of God,
perfettamente
he
il
means
volto del
that
Padre.
he
Dice
perfectly
Gesù
reproduces
a
the face of the
Filippo, chi
Father.
vede me vede il
Jesus
Padre.
tells Philip,
In
he
Gesù
who sees me
noi
sees the
possiamo
Father.
contemplare
In
la
Jesus we
bellezza di
can
Dio. E
contemplate
questo
the beauty
volto
of
bello
God.
di Dio Gesù l'ha
Jesus has
mostrato
shown
durante
this
tutta la sua
beautiful
vita.
face
Il
of
figlio
God
di Dio
throughout
è
his
venuto
life.
nel mondo, si è
The
fatto
Son of
uno di
God
noi
came into the
proprio
world
per
and
mostrarci
became one
la
of us,
bellezza di Dio.
precisely to
Lui
show us the beauty
ha
of
camminato
God.
per le strade della Palestina, è
Jesus
entrato
walked
nei
the
villaggi,
streets of
nelle
Palestine.
case, si è
He went
presentato
into the
nelle
villages
sinagoghe,
and he
proprio
went
con
into the
questo
houses and
obiettivo,
synagogues
mostrarci
precisely
il
to show
volto
us the
del vero
face of
Dio. E
the true
noi
God.
cristiani non crediamo
And
in
we
altro
Christians believe in
Dio se
no other
non
God
colui che
than the
noi
one
vediamo
we see
splendere sul
shining in the
volto
face
di
of
Gesù.
Jesus.
E non
And
stupisce
no wonder
che
that the
scribi e
scribes and Pharisees,
farisei,
when they saw
quando
Jesus
hanno visto
feasting with the
Gesù
publicans and sinners,
banchettare, fare festa
they did
con i
not
pubblicani
recognize
e i
him as the Son
peccatori,
of God.
non lo hanno
He
riconosciuto
did
come
not
figlio di
resemble
Dio,
the
non
God they
assomigliava
had in
infatti
mind
al Dio che loro
and
avevano
had
in
always
mente e che
preached
avevano sempre
in their
predicato nelle loro
catechesis.
catechesi.
And therefore,
E
they
allora
considered
lo hanno
him a
considerato un
heretic,
eretico,
a
un
blasphemer.
bestemmiatore.
They rejected
Hanno
him.
rifiutato lui
And
e la
the good
bella
news
notizia
that
che
he
era
had
venuto a
come to
portare
bring
nel
to the
mondo.
world.
Ma facciamo attenzione,
But let us be careful
perché
because
oggi
today,
anche fra i
even
cristiani ce
among
ne sono
Christians,
ancora tanti
there are
che fanno
still many who
fatica
find it
ad
hard
accettare
to
questo
accept
volto
this beautiful
bello
face
di
of God.
Dio.
And now
A
we would
questo
expect
punto
that
noi ci
Mark would begin
aspetteremmo
to
che
relate
Marco
the
cominciasse a
life of
raccontare la
Jesus
vita di Gesù,
beginning with the
cominciando
Annunciation
dall'annunciazione,
from
dalla
his
sua
birth,
nascita. Non
but
lo
he
fa.
does not do
Questo lo
it.
faranno Luca e
Luke and Matthew will do
Matteo. A
this.
Marco interessa
Mark is
solo
only
ciò che Gesù ha
interested
detto e
in what
fatto
Jesus
durante
said
la
and
sua
did
vita
during
pubblica.
his
E
public
infatti,
life.
a questo
And in
punto,
fact,
lui
at this
introduce la
point,
figura
he
del
introduces
Battista
the
con
figure
una
of the
citazione
Baptist
presa dalla
with a
Bibbia.
quotation taken from the
Ascoltiamo.
Bible. Let us listen. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, "Behold, I am sending my messenger ahead of you. He will prepare your way." A voice of the one crying out in the desert, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths." We have heard the quotation from the prophet Isaiah, in which the evangelist Mark introduces the figure of the Baptist. And who was this Isaiah of whom the gospel text speaks? He was a prophet who lived in Babylon in the 6th century BC. Our text calls him an angel sent by the Lord, with the task of preparing these deportees to welcome the deliverer. The Lord wanted to come to deliver them from the land of bondage. The task of this angel is very arduous, because these deportees were very well prepared people, and in Babylon many of them had been made with a good position, and they did not want to hear any more about returning to their land. They had adapted themselves to the Gentile life. They were content to stay there, and they had renounced even their faith, and they had forgotten the promises made to Abraham and remained in Babylon. Only a small remnant let themselves be prepared and welcomed the deliverer, let themselves be brought into the land of Israel. In this angel who preached to the slaves in Babylon, the evangelist Mark saw the image of the Baptist, also called angel, sent by the Lord to prepare the people to welcome the Lord, who wanted to come to liberate them. What liberation did he want to bring? What was the bondage they were in? The slavery of a wrong image of God, a God that does not communicate joy to you but frightens you and does not make you understand how much He loves you. He wanted to come and deliver you, and an angel needed to prepare the people to welcome the deliverer who would liberate us from a false image of man. The man who felt triumphant when he conquered, when he won battles, when he became rich, and when he dominated. It was the vision of the man who enslaved us, not of free people capable of love. The Baptist was necessary, the angel who was to prepare the people to welcome the liberator Christ with his gospel. The message is also very relevant for us. Let us try to think about our life. How many times we have found ourselves slaves because we have abandoned the Lord and trusted in our whims, in our follies, and have become slaves of our passions, of our vices, of our grudges, and we were not happy. Some angels, and we could give names to these people, prepared the way in us so that the Lord, with His gospel and word, can liberate us. And let us also try to ask ourselves if we have been sometimes angels for someone who was a slave of passions, of vices. Have we prepared someone so that the Lord can come in to liberate him, bring him peace, and make this person happy? And now the forerunner enters the scene. Let us listen.
John the Baptist appeared in the desert, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. People of the whole Judea's countryside and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem were going out to him and were being baptized by him in the Jordan River, as they acknowledged their sins.
To those who came to him because they wanted to be prepared to receive the Lord who wanted to enter into their lives, the Baptist makes a first request: conversion. They must be converted. What the Baptist said to the people of his time, the evangelist Mark wants us to hear today, addressed to each one of us. And it is to us today that the Baptist says, if you want to let the Lord with His gospel enter into your life, prepare to be converted. This term, conversion, does not translate well the idea of the Greek term metanoia, which comes from the verb metanoei. It means get ready to change the way you think, the way you reason, the way you evaluate things. Previously, money was important to you, career, success, and family were absolute. Now be prepared for change. Otherwise, the gospel will not enter your life. And you will be a slave of idols that are nice things. But if they are converted, they do not enslave you at all. They have to stay in their place. Be ready to change your convictions, your certainties, your habits, because if you are not prepared to be challenged, you block the way to the Lord, who wants to come with his gospel. Conversion is not only of the mind, but also of the behavior. If I had considered my neighbor a rival with whom I had to compete because I had to subdue and dominate him, and he had to serve me, now the conduct changes because I have changed my perspective, and he became a brother to love. What is the danger? It is to look for in the gospel what justifies and what we have always thought that is the danger. Let us be attentive. Let us open our hearts and let us prepare ourselves to receive the Lord as he is with his light. Let us not be afraid to leave what does not correspond to the gospel. The objective presented by the Baptist, the remission of sins. The term used is aphesin, which means to blot out sin, evil, and unrighteousness. If we are ready to let the Lord in with his light, we are prepared to convert. Then evil, sin, all wickedness is swept away, and a new world is born. John made his proposal, conversion. How did the people respond to this request? The passage says that they came to him, all those who came from Judea. This translation is not correct. The term that is used in Greek is exaperuto. They went out to him. Whence came they out? And where were they going? Here it is necessary to be clear. In the background, I have a map on which you see the place where the Baptist was, in Bethabara, east of the Jordan River. You can see this river mentioned in the Bible more than 200 times, and therefore very important. It was never important from an economic point of view. No city was ever born on the banks of this river. Nothing to do with the Nile or the rivers of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which gave rise to the great empires. It did not have economic importance, but it always had theological importance because the Jordan River marked the border between the pagan land and the east of the Holy Land, and the land of liberty where the people of Israel had entered, that had come out of Egypt, and the place where these people had passed over the Jordan River, passing from the pagan land to the land of liberty, was Bethabara, the place of the Lord. The Baptist was in the east. Notice where Judea is located. The gospel passage says that all the people of Judea went to him, crossed the Jordan River, and made a reverse exodus back to pagan land. What did the Baptist mean? They are not free. That is not the land of freedom. They are still slaves of their idols. They must make the exodus again. They will cross the Jordan River. This is the baptism. And then I will deliver them to the new Moses, who will introduce them to the new Moses, into the land of liberty. Let us now see how the Baptist appeared before these people and what he said to them. John was clothed in camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist. He fed on locusts and wild honey, and this is what he proclaimed: "One mightier than I is coming after me. I am not worthy to stoop and loosen the thongs of his sandals. I have baptized you with water. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit." Why is the evangelist Mark so interested in presenting us how the Baptist dressed and what he ate? He was dressed in camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist. So, no designer clothes. And Jesus also refers to Baptist's austere manner of dress when he says, "Whom have you gone to see in the wilderness? One who wears soft garments? No, these dwell in the palaces of kings." It could be a timely message even for some Christians of today who perhaps splurge large sums of money on designer clothes, which are then worn a couple of times, stay in the closets, soon to go out of fashion, and then one is ashamed to wear them. But this is not the message that Mark wants to give us. By presenting us with the Baptist dressed in this way, is to tell us that this was the uniform worn by the prophets in the Old Testament. The prophet Elijah, the first one, the greatest of the prophets, dressed exactly like this. What Mark means is that the Baptist is the Elijah. The people were waiting for him to return to prepare them to receive the Lord. The prophet Malachi had said that Elijah will return and turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. He will restore the family peace, without which the Lord cannot come. Mark the evangelist, by presenting the Baptist thus clothed, he means that he is the Elijah that was expected. And then the food with which the Baptist nourished himself. It is not an expression of asceticism, of penance. No, the Baptist eats what the desert offers him. It is how all the nomads of the desert feed themselves. Wild honey is very fragrant and appreciated, and grasshoppers. What did the Baptist preach? We observe that, unlike Matthew and Luke, we do not find threats in Mark, in the mouth of the Baptist. In Matthew and Luke, we find the Baptist saying to the Pharisees and Sadducees, "You brood of vipers, who taught you to flee from the coming fire? The axe is already laid at the root of the trees." None of these threats are found in the Gospel according to Mark. There, the Baptist only says that one is about to enter the history of the world who is stronger than him. The Baptist wants to remain in his place. He has only the task of introducing Jesus, not of replacing him. Let us pay attention. A practical application also for priests, for catechists, for everyone. We, like the Baptist, must not substitute for Jesus. We must bring people to Jesus, and by changing the hearts of these people, we allow Jesus to enter with his gospel into their lives. So let us be careful not to substitute Jesus by introducing ourselves. Then the Baptist distinguishes between his and Jesus' baptism and says They are very different. Mine, says the Baptist, is a water immersion, but he will immerse you in the Spirit. My baptism is an external washing which indicates a break with the past, with the conduct of life contrary to the Word of God, and indicates the decision to change your way of thinking and living. His baptism is an immersion, not in material water, but in the Spirit. That is, it immerses us in the divine life. It is the gift that brought to the world the life of the eternal, that life that is no longer touched by biological death. This is what Mark wants to tell us. Prepare to receive this gift, the baptism in the Spirit, the immersion in the divine life. I wish you all a good Sunday and a good week.